A drink.
But welcome to everyone who's here. Thanks so much. I think the most important thing to note is that anything you learned here today, share with a friend. Keep the knowledge base moving. I'm Caroline Beaulieu. Also joining me is Tom Myers. We are both on the select board. John McGrath is here, sort of unofficially representing the FinCom. And Lori is also here for moral and technical support. And we just wanted to take an opportunity to sort of walk through the warrant, answer any questions that folks have. I put a link in the chat to this place on the town website where you can access the warrant, as well as the FinCom report that goes with the warrant. So that's always available to you to look over. But we thought the best way to do this would just be to all share my screen. We'll sort of go through, some of them are super quick and self-explanatory. We'll tell you sort of what they're for. And then John, if at any point you want to chime in with relevant, comments from FinCom, I anticipate that there's a couple of meaty ones that many people are here to hear about, and we'll probably take longer on those. But this is very casual. It's a conversation. If at any point you have any questions, just unmute yourself, holler. And I said this before, and I'll say it again, we're not here to persuade anyone to vote any one way or the other. We're here to sort of represent the collective opinions of the FinCom and the select board and the findings that we have and the decisions that we made. But ultimately, the beauty of a town meeting is that you get to decide where you want your tax dollars spent and how you want them spent, and you get to vote accordingly. Tom, anything I missed?
You nailed it.
Oh my God, thank goodness. All right, let me share the screen. Any questions before we get started? Awesome. All right, so for folks who have never been to town meeting, we have people here who have not. Town meeting is on Saturday, April 1st at 9 a.m. It is the most throwback, delightful town experience you could possibly have. You get there, you get a clicker. I think Corinne is here and could chime in about the processing experience, but ultimately the town moderator will structure and run through each of these articles. People will make motions on the floor for us to vote on. And then the town has an opportunity to make pro and con arguments on each of them if they so choose, and then we vote. And that's how we decide, which things are approved and which things aren't. Starting, this is the warrant. It's beautiful. I know that you can see it here. The first article on the list is I'm looking at it.
You're in the commentary section.
Yeah, you're actually in the commentary.
Oh,
yeah.
that would explain. I was like, why doesn't this look like there it is?
There we go.
Okay, so here's all of the articles that are going to be in the warrant this year. This section 2 right here. And we'll just start going through them. Article 4.1-1 is to elect town and school district officers at the annual election on Thursday, April 6th. These are the positions that are open. And then we just make a motion and we vote to elect those officers at our election. Anybody have any hard-hitting questions about this one?
Pretty straightforward.
It's very straightforward.
Nothing controversial there.
Nothing controversial there. Reports. This is to hear reports of town officers and selected committees to take action relative thereto. Again, is this all consent agenda right here?
No, report is so there's going to be a couple reports, right? I think Patent Homestead Working Group is going to do a report, and then the planning board will do a report on Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and sort of the updates on where they are with that process. I believe those are the two.
Yep. And then this next one is the article for consent motion, and this means that there's a collection of articles. They're listed right here: 2.1, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, 2.9. that are we don't imagine that there would ever be any reason we would vote against them. So we bind them all together into a consent agenda. So we just do one vote that approves or denies, as the case may be, all of those articles.
Yeah. So, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, they're generally non-controversial, but essentially the town moderator, Bill Bowler, will read out each article And then if there's a particular one that, they want additional discussion on, or if you think you want to have a separate vote on, someone can yell out hold. I believe that's the proper process. And then you could hold that particular article so that there could be a discussion, and then you could have a separate vote. But if no one holds any, one vote would essentially, either pass or not pass each of these motions.
Yep. So, for example, prior year bills, this is one of the consent agenda items.
No,
We pulled it out.
it's not.
Just kidding. Don't listen to
No.
Caroline?
The compensation table is.
Yeah.
Compensation.
Classification table is.
Yeah.
So
Prior year bills cannot be because it's a 4/5 vote.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Good reminder. So compensation and classification table 2627 down here. The water enterprise budget, the annual financial actions. We got a lot of questions about this last year. This is just like transferring money into the places that we already said the money was going to go. We just have to vote to approve that those things actually happen. And so it can be scary when you look and you're saying like, oh yes, we're doing a consent agenda item for almost $500,000. It's not actually like that.
Yeah, and it actually benefits the taxpayer, because I believe there's a tax deduction on that, or tax rate decrease. Yeah, a reduction of tax rate on that one.
Okay, any question on the consent agenda or how that process works or why we group them together that way? Cool. All right, the prior year bills, as Lori just said, this one is pulled out because we have to have a 4/5 vote. And so it is its own thing, but this is essentially bills that came in after the end of the year that need to be paid. And so they're in here. This is, you can see the expected request for this one at the time that this was posted was $1,575. And we just as a town have to vote to approve that amount of money can be used to pay these bills that came in after the fact.
Yep. It's like one bill for like plumbing and maintenance or something like that. It came in after the fact. So it's essentially we have to pay our debts.
It kind of reminds me of the January credit card bill where you're like, oh, right.
Yeah.
I did buy that thing that I didn't need after Christmas.
Did you want to do the compensation table, or did we talk about that one?
Talk about the compensation tables.
The compensation table is just updating our compensation for our lovely town workers who work so hard. So there's, any sort of union increases or contractual increases in their compensation. There would be an updated compensation table, and that would be reflected in the budget, which we'll talk about in a couple of moments. But so there is a impact, but we don't spell it out right here. It's part of the actual budget. So we need to pay our wonderful town employees.
And one thing I'll point out for those of you that are becoming expert at warrant reading. So there's the fiscal year tax rate impact. So you can always look at that to sort of get an idea of whether or not a motion will or will not affect your tax rate. Again, it's based on assumptions. It's subject to change. It's not perfect math. It's just meant to sort of give you an idea notionally of how something may or may not affect the tax rate. And then right below that, you can see whether there was recommended favorable or unfavorable action. And there's both the select board's recommendation as well as the FinCom. And in many of these, you'll see that they're the same. Some places they're different. Some place even the individual boards are split on their vote. But again, this is just to sort of give you a sense of like how these bodies felt about this overall article at the time that this went out. General town departmental appropriations. Tom. or John. Or Lori.
I will defer to John if he wants to take the reins.
So this is our big, huge town budget, which is, as you can see, $37,301,315. There's some other math in there. It's an increase of 9% over our fiscal year 23 budget. And then you'll see that we actually pull out the portions of the town or school budgets that are funded in separate warrant articles.
Mhm.
There's so remind me, the total school budget is in here though, right? There's different
Yes.
yeah.
Correct.
Yep.
Yes.
So the $37 million includes the town budget and the school budget. You approve them together.
Mhm.
But you can see here that the budget requests for the school increased 3.91% for Hamilton over last year.
So if I recall, if I took the notes correctly from the summary section, this increase in budget would represent on the average home, annual median home of about $713,000 home would see an increase in FY24 of about $506 in their tax bill. And someone correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, I don't know.
I believe that's, I took that from the summary that the FinCom put together, so that should be correct.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment. The goal going into the budget process each year is to abide by the spirit of Proposition 2.5, which means we try to manage the town expenses, school and departmental, under that 2.5, Proposition 2.5. So in general, this budget represents what we refer to as level service, meaning we're not increasing or we're not adding a brand new department or a brand new function. So those two concepts of trying to align with Proposition 2.5, which if we don't would require an override, so we try to avoid that. And we're not adding a new function or a new department or doing something we've never done in the past. So it's really a level service budget. So at the highest level, that's what we are striving for and have achieved this year. In the schools, I think the highlight for the schools, Eric Tracy, I think in the fourth quarter of last year, went to the school committee and talked about the class sizes and how many students are in each class and how many teachers and staff they need for the students. And the schools actually did remove some positions from their budget. So one of the themes that's been out there is the school population is down, but the schools haven't reduced staffing. Well, this year they did. So Eric, I think, did a nice job explaining the class size and the relationship between staff and students and made some adjustments in the downward direction. So I think that was, for me, the highlight of the budget. There's a lot of detail. There's a lot of department level explanations you can go through, but high level, Proposition 2.5 override was avoided, level service, and the schools are attentive to the decrease in the school population.
And for those who don't follow the riveting process from start to finish, these budget talks start taking place at the end of the prior year. And then there are multiple joint meetings between FinCom, select boards, both towns, and the regional schools, to just sort of like, there's a budget that's presented, the budget that's challenged, there's a budget that's reduced. So like, it's a very collaborative process that takes place over months and months and months before we get to this number. And if you are interested in getting involved, next year, just let us know. We're always looking for people who are excited about collaborative budgets. At town meeting, the bill will recognize Eric Tracy, who will go through the budget. Eric's actually really great at always having like an overview slide that sort of hits the high points and sort of walks through the budget. He will not go, line by line. After that, Joe, our town manager, will be recognized. He'll walk through the town budget, so you'll get sort of a high level view of that. And then to Tom's point, there will be an option. There'll be a time when we read each of sort of the big sections. And if there's something you wanted to pull out of the town budget to discuss separately, you would say hold when he made that announcement. And then we would vote on everything except for the thing that was held, at which point that would become a separate conversation. All right. Capital expenditures. This is a capital, I mean, it's to provide funds for various projects contained within the capital plans project.
Yeah, so some of these projects are listed in the attachment that the FinCom put together, but essentially there's a sander vehicle, radio upgrade, there's road and sidewalk repairs, a new fuel station, a new DPW garage. It's putting money towards the Patton Park master plan, library HVAC system, library security, a new police vehicle, and then some security cameras, I believe, as well. So there's a whole bunch of different capital projects. There's a summary that sort of describes each of them in the attachment. And I believe this one is likely to be paid out of the free cash, which would mean that if that is so, then it would not have any impact on FY24 tax rate.
Which is why you see that the FinCom gave us their 5-0 stamp of approval. Any questions so far? Any questions on capital expenditures? I know we're all excited about the DPW sander. I know I can hardly believe it. Speaking of things I can hardly believe, the next item is a fire engine purchase. The only interesting thing to note about why the fire engine purchase and why now, because of COVID and backups and all this, it takes years for a fire engine to be made ready for us. So we actually have to approve it and buy it years before we're actually going to get it. I think it's two or 3 years before we'll actually get our new fire engine. And so we're going ahead and doing this proactively now so that we can make sure that we have the fire engine that we need when it's time for us to take our existing one of our fire engines out of commission. There is no impact on the 2024 tax rate with the new fire engine.
It's being paid out of stabilization.
It is a 2/3 vote because some of the money's out of stabilization.
Yep.
I plan on making the motion on the floor wearing a plastic fire hat. So I look forward to if you show up.
I thought you were going to wear full gear, Caroline.
Oh, I would wear full gear, but I wouldn't want anybody to be intimidated. So
I will be reading the prior one for the capital projects, and bear with me when I'm reading that because it's about 4-paragraph long motion, which I reluctantly agreed to. So just bear with me as I read through that.
He didn't know until we signed him up for it that's
yeah. I no, everyone was silent, and then I was like, "Oh, I'll take it." And then I looked at it, and it's literally like describing every project that we're going through. So I will be there for 10 minutes.
Once again, I think that you should do it in a British accent. All right. The next article 2.6, which I believe is part of the consent agenda.
It is. Yep.
This is the water enterprise budget, which is the budget that has been set forth. And you can read through it. It's an increase this year of 12.99%. The water department is supported by the water fees that we all pay, so it doesn't impact our tax rate. The only thing that impacts that is when we adjust the water rates in town. But it is not your taxes that pay for water. Any questions about?
I think one of the things to note here was that there was, I believe, an increase because there's a requirement that we maintain at least 20% of our operating budget equivalent into the water enterprise budget. So I think that was to account for that percentage. Is that right, Lori?
I think so.
Yep.
Sounds great. Is everyone having a good time? I hope so.
Yeah.
Okay, because
Fantastic time.
okay, good. Okay, thank God. You know, they say everything is local. So, all right. The Article 2.7, which is the annual financial actions. This is the one that we already discussed. It's part of the consent agenda. It's where we're just moving money from places that we already know we have to move it to the places that we're going to move it in order to do all these things. But it will reduce your estimated tax rate by approximately 19 cents per thousand assessed valuation, or $137 in tax assessment on the average home of $713. So whoever told you that 19 cents doesn't make a difference, multiply that by 1,000 by 713,000 and it does. Ooh. Okay. The next Article 2.8 is the Hamilton Development Corporation to see if the town will raise and appropriate the sum of $58,000 to the Hamilton Development Corporation or take any action thereon or relative thereto. This is the local meals excise tax that we have, raises money for the HDC. Stop me when I'm lying about this. And this is just appropriating those funds from that tax to the Hamilton Development Corporation. Yeah,
Pretty straightforward.
So in case you didn't know that there was a meals tax that was helping fund the Development Corporation, now you do. Every time cocktail in town, you're improving. All right, the OPEB trust fund. This is raising and appropriating the sum of $125,000 to the purpose of funding the other post-employment benefits OPEB liability trust fund. There's a history here. John, do you want to give us the OPEB history?
I think the easiest comment is the easiest comment to make is we have a liability that we are on the hook for, and as it relates to employees, past employees of the town who are retired, and we thoughtfully fund that based on advice from our I'll just say our partners on the timing, the rate, and the pace of funding that liability. So just to keep it really simple, we take very seriously that this commitment is there, and the town has very consistently adopted a really consistent stream. There is a bit of catch up going on, but suffice it to say that this is an obligation the town has, and they take very seriously making sure it's properly funded. I'll just leave it at that. There's a lot more we can go into, which I don't think would really add a whole lot to the conversation, but
It's the responsible thing to do, if not the fun and sexy thing to do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
It is a pretty minimal impact. So there is a tax increase, but it's on an average median home, and would be a $37 taxes. So it's pretty.
But it's something you'll see every year. And I mean, the school is doing the same thing. I mean, the school has a very large liability. So it's a these are obligations to retired employees. So it's something we've got to stay attended to. So
Yeah, you got to do it.
All right. Is 210 part of the no, it's not, because it needs a
Nope.
No. So the stabilization, but this is a transfer of $57,000 from free cash to the general stabilization fund. It's basically we need a certain amount of money in the fund at all times, of the general fund, the operating revenue in the fund at all times, and we're transferring money to make sure that we meet that.
Yep. And 5% of the operating budget needs to be equal to.
So we're just being responsible, putting the money over there.
Yep.
All right. 2-11 is the revolving fund establishing expenditure limits. And there's two of them here. There's the recreation revolving fund, which is, I can't remember, the old ones were on here. All right. One of them, the recreation revolving fund used to have a limit of $600,000. It's increasing to $750,000. The EDS and clinics revolving fund used to have a $30,000 expenditure limit, and we're raising that to $200,000.
So basically, these are funds where we collect money and then authorize to then spend that same amount of money. So like for like recreation, we get, money will be pulled in through user fees, pool passes, et cetera. And then you would then expend those funds on various things. So, I guess because, fees are increasing with the pool and other registrations around town, there's a need to increase that amount so that it can collect more and then ultimately spend more.
Yeah.
So, somewhat right.
Yeah, and the
Yes.
EDS and clinics, obviously, because of COVID, it was like a huge jump. Well, I actually thought that there was a typo the first time I read it, but it was just a really, really big jump in the expenditures there because of the services related to and after COVID.
I think the one comment I'd make is on the recreation and pool. The program is very popular, very well run. And the fact that we have to raise the spending limit is a testimony to how successful the rec department and pool is. So I think it's a good thing.
I would second that because their summer camps, filled up within 3 minutes.
Yeah.
It was wild.
We broke the internet that day.
We did.
Yeah.
It also helps that it is the most affordable game in town, literally. Because I don't know if anybody else had to sign up for other summer camps this summer, but we're not eating at our house since paying for summer.
No, we've given up eating for the rest of the year.
We sit around and talk about food, we just don't eat any. All right. The community preservation budget. This is just approving the budget for the specified projects for
Right.
the year.
This is an annual article for the things that we have to pay for. So there's administrative costs every year. And then if we don't fund a specific grant, then we have to put 10% of what comes in as into the pockets of historic preservation or community housing or open space. Just a little background, we've done a lot of projects recently in open space, so we've never had to do that transfer because the projects cover it. But we have put it in for historic preservation and community housing.
And there are materials on the town website if you ever want to look at like what CPC funds can be used for. And it's like there's a percentage allocation. You can't spend, there's the 4 sections and you can't spend certain percentages over in any of those specific sections. So it's actually kind of interesting, if you're into that kind of thing.
Yep. And this is funded through a surcharge on your property tax. So 2% surcharge. So it's like a separate line item on your property tax.
Right, as well as state, we get money from the state as well.
Right.
Every year.
All right. So now we're getting to the reason I think all of y'all are here. Is to talk through.
We're gonna end there. No.
Yeah.
What's that reason?
Well, I couldn't imagine. So there are a few articles related to the athletic fields projects. The one I think that's getting the most sort of airtime right now is the overall budget approval, which we're going to get to in a second. But before we get to the approval of borrowing, there is the community preservation school athletic fields budget approval. And essentially there is $800,000 from the community preservation fund that we have already sort of earmarked to be part of this project and to sort of offset some percentage of the cost of this project. And so this particular article is to approve the use of that $800,000 that will later be deducted from the 15 million price tag, which again, we're gonna get to that 15 million in a second. But this first article is to approve those funds to be used for the athletic fields. And I believe this one has to pass in order for the other one to pass because they're contingent on one another. That one is going to offset the cost of the other.
Right. We would not do anything with the 800,000 if the project itself did not pass.
Right.
And also just point of information, whenever it comes to shared programs like the school district, we do it like 2/3, 1/3 with Wenham. So they approved 400,000 of their CPC money. So that's now $1.2 million that would be deducted.
Yep.
If they both pass a town meeting.
Carolyn, I have a question.
Yes.
What portion of the community preservation fund different divisions is the athletic field come under?
Open space and recreation.
Open space and recreation. Thank you.
Yep. But it cannot be used for like the turf fields themselves.
Correct.
Yeah, so there are certainly, there's legal precedent set for things you cannot spend it on relative to the building of specifically fields. And one of those preclusions is the building and maintaining of turf fields. So this will be a lot of the more peripheral sort of like landscaping and other sort of items. Drainage, things like that. Yep. Any other questions specifically about this CPC $800,000? Okay. So now we get into the approval of borrowing for the total amount, which is this 15 million amount. And I'm going to allow anyone who wants to sort of talk through this in a second, but a couple of things to sort of note. The first is that there is an assumption, and you can see it here in the Warrant article, that the budget, the overall budget, you have to ask for approval to borrow the overall cost of the project, which is currently set at $15 million. There's the assumption that we will then deduct this sort of the grants and funds that we have earmarked in our minds and in the project from that amount. So for example, that 800,000, the 400,000 that's coming from Wenham, as well as the projected amount of fundraising that the 501c3 for the athletic fields is planning on doing. I don't know if anybody saw Eric Tracy's special note today. It went out this afternoon. He sent a very long email sort of covering all of this. And right now they're projecting to raise $2 million. So the idea is that all of that will come off of that $15 million price tag. The other thing to remember is that we, the residents of Hamilton, are not paying the full remainder, right? We then split the difference with Wenham. And when you do that, once the sort of knowns are deducted, we're looking at like a $6.5 or $7 million debt for Hamilton specifically. So the $15 million is in fact the budget for the project. And so there's certainly conversation to be had about that. But what we as Hamilton residents would actually be looking at borrowing, we're projecting that it's somewhere closer to $6 or $7 million. Any sort of high level questions about that?
I didn't see that letter. Did it go to parents?
It was, yeah, it's, let me see what time.
So, and did they, my one question, because this came up on the community preservation as well, what they're counting as fundraising is not the grants.
Right.
They're not in that 2 million, right?
Right.
Okay.
So that's my understanding, that there's the money that's being raised by the 501c3, which is a separate fundraising engine that would be deducted separate from like the CPC funds and the things that we're looking at there. Now, I think the challenge is, the sky's the limit on fundraising. They could say we're going to raise 5 million and that would be amazing. And that would sort of come off of it. I think they've done a pretty good job of sort of seeing what the early indicators are of what amount of funding they'll get from that. And I think they're projecting it between 1 and 2 million. But who knows? And that's sort of the challenge with this, is that there are a lot of sort of unknowns that we have to navigate, because who knows if the institution of savings is going to come in and want to, throw us $1 million, because why not? But that's not currently the way it is. So the FinCom was unanimous in recommending unfavorable action for this project. And they wrote a very, very thoughtful sort of reasoning for that in their included report. And so I encourage anyone who hasn't read that to look at that. The select board was actually pretty split on it, but it did end up going favorable action because it was like 2-1, and then there was some abstaining from that. So there's a lot of thoughts here, and there's a lot of people that feel different ways about it. And so I sort of encourage everybody to really think about the impact it will have to them. John, I'm going to hand it over to John in a second. He can sort of lightly talk about sort of what the tax impacts would be for each household. And I think we're hearing one of two questions. What is the impact going to be to me if we borrow the $6.5 or $7 million? And then what is the relative impact if we decide to do all of these other capital projects on the horizon that we've talked about? I think the biggest one that some of us think about is the new school building, the new elementary school that's on there. And there will be impacts. This one is a little bit lighter, but they get heavier the more that we start to borrow. John, did you want to sing a song?
Yeah, I think in considering this, the FinCom, and I encourage you to read the commentary, because we put a history in there goes back to 2012. But the FinCom does feel we need to invest in the fields. The question that we raised is how much and how fast, but we certainly do need to make an investment in an improvement. There's no doubt about it. And the one thing that struck us as we reviewed the history going back to 2012 is consistently the consultant that we used, Gale Associates, laid out a phased approach, 8 to 10 years, do a piece, get it done, do another piece, get it done. And that had been the consistent message over 3 different reports by Gale. So the FinCom not only feels that a phased approach makes the most sense, and there's a fair amount of conversation in our commentary about that, but also is, let's just say you broke the 15 million into 3 phases. Let's just, for argument's sake, is putting $5 million into a field the right thing to do now? Or is there another $5 million project in town that should be done before that? So if you take a step back, rather than 15 all at once, let's be more thoughtful and planful. Well, what's the most high priority usage of a large chunk of money? And our position is, let's look around the town, not only the school department, for significant projects that need attention. And we didn't think doing the entire project in one fell swoop was the right decision for the broader Hamilton and school project at this time. So high level, break it up, be a little bit more thoughtful and planful, rather than doing it all at once. So there's a lot more detail behind it, and you can read through it, but that was the long and the short of it.
Yeah, and we had our new finance director was at the meeting where we discussed this on Monday, and she did put together some sort of rough projections based on the same math you've been seeing here, like the tax rate and the average assessed home value. And just to give folks a ballpark, and this is not a final number, but the average increase based on this borrowing ask is like between $250 and $300 a household,
Right.
depending on your
Depending on how much is fundraised, yeah.
Yeah, so it was like closer to 300 if they raise $1 million. It was closer to 250 if they raise $2 million.
Yeah.
So, and this is a really sort of simple way of thinking of this project, because I agree with what John is saying, is that this is more of a holistic ask. But I've said to people, like, the question is, if this is a 10-year debt service, the immediate question is, is it worth the 300 and something, the $300-ish a year for the next 10 years to pay for these fields?
Yeah.
That's essentially what you're voting on in regards to this.
Right.
And that's a question that only you, taxpayer, can answer for yourself.
Hmm.
Any questions that we can answer about the school athletic fields project? Approval of borrowing? Y'all, I really expected some hard-hitting, difficult.
Yeah, I thought it was.
Y'all must have really front-loaded on the wine. Like, this is great. Yes, let's do it.
$300. Why not?
$300.
I'll just make one comment. In our commentary, you will see that we pointed out and listed some of the other projects that are on the radar, or I refer to it as in the pipeline. So, for example, there's a paragraph, I think I'm not sure what page it is. It's FinCom does not debate the need to invest in improvements. So basically what we've done is we've said, in a couple of years, we're going to be asked to vote for a new elementary school. So we are on the path. We're in a feasibility study right now, and in a couple of years, there'll be a vote to do a debt exclusion that the schools will bring for we basically used $100 million project. So that's in the works. That's about 2 years out. And that's a big deal. There's also other capital. The high school needs a new roof. There are other facility improvements. And then if you come to the town side, there's water infrastructure. We've listed that at 10 million. There's a town hall renovation that you'll hear about later in the year. That's probably going to be 6 million in terms of spending, and other facility improvements. So we wanted to give folks a flavor for, if you look at the capital radar screen here in Hamilton and Wenham, there's a lot of projects, particularly a new school, that are coming down the pike that we need to address. So we didn't want people to make a field decision or a field vote for $300, on your bill without knowing there's a lot more coming. And just in the spirit of transparency, well, what's going on in town, that paragraph I think is important to sort of point out to people.
So yeah,
that's the other additional item that I think we just wanted to get out there, so people didn't miss the fact that there's a lot of projects that are not too far off in the distance.
This is just showing me that I should have gone into roofing. All right, well, we will move on from
I'll just add one other thing, Caroline, just because I know we're talking a lot about obviously the financial impact, but if folks are curious about the actual project, there is information on the school district website. They have a PowerPoint presentation that does speak to the actual project. So if you're curious about what the project entails, there's resources out there where you can take a look at, so you know exactly what you are voting on and what the project looks like.
Yep. And it is, to their credit, it is a beautiful project, and it is a comprehensive project. And, as John mentions, like, maybe to our detriment or maybe not, that it's so comprehensive, but it really does cover the needs of, it's softball fields, it's tennis courts, it's turf fields, it's, concessions, it's bathrooms, it's all of that stuff in this sort of comprehensive plan. You can also, if you do get the superintendent emails, if you have a kid in the school district, the mock-ups are in there as well.
Caroline,
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to make one point. It's a $15 million project. And I know that we look at it like it's only $300 a year, but that argument has been used before. And they used to say it's just a cup of coffee a day. And during that period that we had all those overrides, it's only a cup of coffee, but over the course of 20 years, we're over $100 million from the results of the last 10 overrides. So I'm in favor of some of the work that needs to be done, but I don't think that the best argument is to go back and try and reduce it to the ridiculous and say that's just a cup of coffee, because it's a cup of coffee, but it's really $15 million. And the other point I'd like to make is that I don't think we should overlook the fact that the CPC funds and the stabilization funds are still taxes that we've paid. So it isn't like they're reducing this and the taxpayers are getting a break, because that's money that the taxpayers put in the first place. And I think a lot of people recognize that. And if your argument's going to be that we're reducing this 15 million by this magic number, funds that just came out of magic, they haven't. It's money that taxpayers have paid. So I just want to make that point, and I'm sure it'll probably come up at town meeting. But
Yeah, it's a good point, Jay. But I mean, I think Caroline and I aren't here to necessarily sway someone one way or the other. And certainly not saying, a cup of coffee a day is what it's going to cost. We're just trying to give a realistic picture for the voters to say this is the, estimated cost that it would be if you vote yes. So that way, at least, you and others that go to town meeting on April 1st can have a sort of a realistic idea of, if they really want this field or really don't want this field, they know what the impact will be on their wallet.
No, and I appreciate that. And that's why I'm on here tonight. It's because those were kind of the figures that I was looking for from John. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I would say this, I think there's people for whom hearing $300 a year or, divide that by 12 is like oh yeah, I've heard plenty of people where that is not the reaction, right? To your point, like there's plenty of people who say $300 a year, no, I'm on a fixed income, or, we moved here in our post-retirement years, or whatever that answer is. So I appreciate your comment, but I also think it's not, a lot of people don't see it as a cup of coffee. They see it as, a new Apple Watch. And they'd rather their Apple Watch.
Okay.
So there you go. All righty. The next agenda, or the next article, is the amendment to the conservation bylaw. Little backstory here. Folks may or may not remember that this was actually supposed to come up in the special town meeting that we had in October last year. October. It was pulled off at the last minute. There was just some questions that we felt were unanswered. It did not reflect on the ConsCom, who has done their best to socialize the updates to the conservation bylaw. But there were just some outstanding questions that we as the select board felt needed to be answered and needed to be socialized with the community a little bit more thoroughly before it went to a vote, because as most of you know, people don't pay attention to anything until like the day before, maybe the week before we vote on it. And then suddenly it's like, what is this? Where is it coming from? And so we did pull it off, and we're putting it back on here. They've had a lot of community gatherings. They've had a lot of open meetings, but it is still worth reviewing the bylaw changes and the updates, because they're not everyone's cup of tea. And so again, you need to read them and you need to make a choice about whether you agree with sort of the updates. And Tom, I'll let you sort of speak to them, as Tom is our liaison to the ConsCom.
Yeah, not much to add to what you said, Caroline. I would just say, a majority of the changes are sort of updating the bylaw to reflect the regulations. So the way it works is you have a bylaw, and then the Conservation Commission then creates a bunch of regulations. That's sort of how they enforce the bylaw. There's a lot of a lot of the meat of what they have been doing for a long time is in the regulation. And after, town council had reviewed it, they really said some of the stuff really needs to be in the bylaw to really hold any sort of legal authority. So when you see some of the changes, you may see that there are changes to the bylaw that may seem like they're significant, but they're actually things that are already in practice, already being enforced under the regulations. They're being moved to the bylaw so they're more legally enforceable. And so it's not really expanding the jurisdiction or the enforcement of the bylaws. Essentially, taking what's already there, already been in practice, already been enforced, moving it to the bylaw at the advice of council to make sure that it has the legal weight behind it. And like Caroline said, they've done a great job, making these revisions, engaging with the community, holding public hearings. They recently, last week, had a meeting where they went through some comments and some of the red line changes, and they had it was recorded, and I believe it's on the town website, so you can take a look at that, where they had a lot of feedback, a lot of questions from people viewing, and they were able to provide answers. So if you have any concerns or questions about that, I would encourage you to look at that video. They did a really great job of walking through each, individual edit and each comment and addressing that. So it did a really thorough job.
You'll notice there is 5-0 favorable action from the FinCom. There was a 401. I thought it was 410. Wasn't it? It was a no, wasn't it? It wasn't an abstain.
I think it was abstain.
Oh, so never mind. Anyway, so not 100% on this one, but 4 out of 5 ain't bad.
Wasn't it because somebody did not attend one of the sessions yet?
I need to go back and look, because the person that I'm thinking of, who I was fairly certain was prepared to say no. That's what that I thought that they were going to say no. So I was surprised to see that it was abstain. Because I thought it was on the grounds that, so essentially exactly what Tom said. This just basically removes the gray area. It makes it very black and white what you can and can't do. And there was some sort of feeling that the gray area allows us to be a little more flexible. And right now, a lot of people appreciate that flexibility, that there are sort of loopholes where you can do stuff, and that sort of solidifying this to black and white. While it makes it easier and makes it black and white, it also makes it black and white. And so there was a lot of conversation about, whether that was what they wanted. But again, it to my memory may not be serving, and that could have just been
I don't recall exactly. So we'd have to double check on that. But
anyway, I would like to hear a joke. Okay. What did the Romans say when the lion ate his wife? He didn't care. He was gladiator.
There you go.
There you go.
hold on.
Okay.
Right, y'all. We've been here for an hour and there's jokes, but we're almost to the end. There's only 2 more things to cover, and they are quick. Article 3.2 is the increasing the allowable amount, the allowable reduction for the senior property tax work-off program. And this one it used to be a dollar amount, and now it's a service hours.
Yeah,
I can speak to that one if you want.
yeah. Go ahead, Laura. You'll probably speak to it better than I can.
So because we keep track of this in the town manager's office, and I noticed that in the last 4 years, the minimum wage has increased. And as the minimum wage increased, then the number of hours the seniors could put in were fewer. And a lot of them, while they need to have this benefit, they also like putting in the time. So the law actually allows the town to change it to 125 volunteer service hours every year. So that way there's a set number of hours, even if the minimum wage keeps increasing. And we looked at it in finance, and it was a small impact to increase that. But I think it will be a benefit to the seniors who participate in the program.
Lori, I have a question.
Sure.
How many seniors are in that program at this point in Hamilton?
9.
Just 9.
Mm-hmm.
So
Part of it is just finding the spots. And we have people at the library, one at the rec center, one at the COA, and 5 at the town hall.
I see. So it's a matter of not having the jobs for the seniors to work off that.
Yes, because especially with computers, and then some things that are, there's confidentiality. There's not as much available. Back in the day with a lot of filing, I think that's a lot of seniors did filing in all the different departments, but that's changed with computers. So we're trying to find opportunities for sure, but there's not a lot. And I have done some research, and some towns really restrict the number. They might do 5 and they only have $5,000, or, we've tried to be flexible and find the work, but right. I suppose a couple more might be able to help in the library, but it is basically shelving books. So that's not always their first choice.
No. Thanks.
All right, to our last article. This is a citizen's petition. And that means that a citizen of the community went out and got the required signatures to have something put on the warrant that wasn't put on the warrant by the select board or one of the other bodies in town. So this is a request to restrict, to put a conservation restriction on certain parcels of the Patton homestead. And I mean, you can read this as well as I can. It's basically asking to put that into a conservation restriction, which would mean that we couldn't sort of develop or activate that in any new and different ways. And because of that, you will see that it was recommended unfavorable action by both the select board and the FinCom. From the perspective of the select board, which I think echoes a little bit of the FinCom, we have just recently sort of given the Patton homestead a runway to sort of think of new ways to both activate and monetize the space over the next 5 years or so. And as part of that, there are sort of some ongoing projects that may or may not be affected by the fact that if we suddenly put this into a conservation restriction, we would not be able to do some of those projects, which would threaten sort of the long-term viability of the space for the town. And so we do recommend unfavorable action, but certainly there were enough signatures on there to get it on the warrant. So I would absolutely recommend that you read this through and sort of understand what the ask is, because the town as a whole will vote on it. Yeah. Any questions about that? There's a map on appendix 1.
Mhm.
All right. So that is the 2024 warrant. Does anybody have any overarching questions?
I do.
Oh, Jay.
This is for John. I'm just wondering, John, all the things that you mentioned, about the high school roof and the water infrastructure and the town hall and the elementary school. Have you given any, do you have any calculations on what the possible effect might be on the average or medium tax bill with all those things inclusive?
Well, I have an illustration, like, well, I guess I can walk you through it. We said the fields was 300.
Yep.
All right, on a tax bill.
Yep.
Depending on the size of the school we build, that would be 1,000 to 1,200.
Okay.
So it's a much larger project that would be financed over 30 years.
Okay.
Right. So
John, are
So-
you taking into account what the state contributes?
oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The state probably would depending on the size of the project, the state would contribute, maybe, $30 to $40 million. And really, that is something that we don't want to let slip through our hands. We feel a new school is required. I think in general, that's but it comes at a cost. So if you look out over the next, 5 or 6 years, if we were to finance every dollar of capital that we have on the radar, that's, between the school building and the fields, you could be at, $1,500 per year per household. So, I mean, the math is pretty simple, but we haven't built a new school in town for 20 plus years. So these are expenses that are pretty to be expected. You have to, you have to refresh your school buildings, and we haven't done that. We've got very aged infrastructure. So as I look at the need, we need to do something about the school buildings. That would be my view.
And we're also and one new school would replace 2 existing schools.
Correct.
Yeah, and just to add to the school building process, so the fact that John alluded to, the state paying for a portion of it of 30 to 40 million. So to kind of get on that path, you have to sort of put in an application and sort of be like accepted into the program, so to speak. So it's not it's potentially not an opportunity that comes very often. So you have to sort of make sure that you're utilizing that if you get that opportunity.
Yeah, if you want to read more about it, go onto the website that Carolyn had showed and look at our commentary from last October. The FinCom wrote up a very explanatory set of comments around what Tom just mentioned, the state funding authority, how they go about it. So if you want to learn about it, the best thing to do is read the commentary from last October's special town meeting. And it talks about, I think in that write-up, I think I used an $85 million building as an example. So I would suggest, if you want to dive into that, read the commentary and then go out onto the state website. It explains how their program progresses. And then back to Lori's comment, they will fund, I'll just say 40% of the eligible project expenses.
Yeah,
So
really
that's a
good.
very valuable asset that Hamilton doesn't want to let slip through our hands. So in fact, we need to build a school. We want the state right there with us.
Thank you.
So I think if you want to educate yourselves, dive in and look at it. But, $100 million school costs a lot of money.
$100 million.
So Jay, to answer your question, I'll just say, the school cost for 30 years on an average tax bill could be $1,000. Depends on whatever we build. And the fields we think might be in the $300 range. And then there's other capital that we need to take care of in town. So that kind of gives you a sense of what it could be. I'm not saying those are the numbers because we're 2 years away from knowing.
Right, but it's the town hall. too,
Fields would be over 10 years, right?
Yeah, the fields are 10 years. The school would be probably 30.
Yep. Nancy has her hand up.
Yeah, Nancy, what can we help you with?
You there, Nancy?
Yeah,
She's
maybe
on
not.
mute.
Maybe it just picked up our hand waving because if you have that feature on, so.
Okay, I was unable to mute myself, sorry.
Oh, there you go.
That was a bit of a problem. I wonder if that 1,500 isn't a little conservative, and I did hear at the end that there might be additional expenses. Given that you said that we have a 9% increase of about $506 for an average home, just to keep a level service budget this year, wouldn't that $1,500 really be a very conservative number?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Nancy, as part of the FinCom, I've spent hours doing different scenarios. All right. If you look at in the October write-up, when we talked about the new school, because we were talking about the stabilization fund at that point, I used, for purposes of illustration, I used an $85 million school. All right. I've recently done, a scenario that is $120 million school. So just those two data points, there's a wide range of possibilities. So you're right. I mean,
Well, and I think it's important to note that we're not saying that that would be the only increase. We're saying that would be the contributable increase for these projects.
these two projects.
Yeah,
Right.
like our tax rate may still go up. So we may be talking
Oh,
about
yeah.
$1,500 plus the incremental increase in taxes year over year. The school budget may go up, and that raises, like, this is just sort of your guaranteed increase.
Yeah.
On top of everything else.
Yep.
Yeah. So this was just those two projects that I mentioned. The two
The problem
schools.
for the taxpayer is we've lost that SALT deduction where the local property tax was deductible from the federal. So it
Right.
really hurts every time, every dollar. It's not just a cup of coffee
Right.
that affects us. It's very serious. And as a senior citizen here in town, we're being pushed out, frankly. But yeah, no, that's not your problem, but
And it's, and the approach that the FinCom took was, on the field project, was we feel as though an investment in the fields is appropriate, but let's not do it all at once. We felt that that's a more respectful plan that
I
gives,
support that.
yeah, and it gives everyone a chance to, okay, let's just do the football field. All right, let's see how that goes, and then take a breath, and before we spend another 4 million, give people a chance to digest that and see how it goes. So Nancy, our view is a phased approach makes sense from a number of different perspectives. It allows multiple votes. It also might allow, and one of the examples we used is to spend $2 million to retrofit the science labs in the high school rather than the football field. So if you do this stuff in phases, I think it's a little bit more respectful, but a little bit more planful. That was some of the thinking that we had.
Isn't that how the homeowner has to do something anyway? You can't put a roof on and rebuild your deck and all of the things you need to do at one time. You've got to fit it in your budget.
Right.
I mean, and we're not going to be able to do those things if all our money's going to taxes. So our property is going to deteriorate because we won't have that additional money to keep our property up.
Right. And if you're so inclined, there's additional reading and research that the FinCom has done, and it has to do with property valuation. And there are multiple professional and academic studies that said in a town like Hamilton, the best thing you can do to increase your property value is to invest in schools. And if you're so inclined, you can get in and read some of the studies. And the studies, one of the studies that I read that was 2020 was, if someone's looking at communities in order to make a home purchase, the real estate people will tell you that if you're in an excellent school system and one that the town is investing in, the real estate folks will say that potential buyer will bid up houses in that town if they see investment in the school system. So schools, as an investment option for a town and a taxpayer, it yields a greater benefit to your property value than buying a second sander instead of the first sander. So on the other side of the coin, Nancy, there's proof and well-oiled research studies, people at Harvard and Duke and some of these academics, they've actually sort of done the research and proven out that one of the best things you can do is invest in your school facilities and programs, and then you get a sustained benefit on your real estate value. So there's another part of the conversation, and I think that's important to spend some time and look at. So, but
Thank you.
I'm with you. I certainly get your point of view, Nance, and I'm in your camp in terms of age and longevity, but I'm also looking at the property value conversation as well.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really interesting and dynamic town meeting. I think, as we all are intimately aware of, like, greater than 95% of our revenues come from the residents of this town. We don't have a commercial tax base. We will probably not ever have a meaningful tax base or commercial tax base in the town. So what we do, we pay for. And it's a constant sort of struggle to figure out what we pay for, how we pay for it, and when we pay for it. But I think the reality that we're in right now is that nobody disagrees that we need it. It's a question of how much it costs and how we pay for it. But we will be paying for it, the people. So, any other questions? Anything we can answer? I mean, it can be like, you can ask Tom personal questions. He loves that. Yeah. All right. Town meeting is Saturday, April 1st. It's a week from this Saturday. It is at 9 a.m. You can dress casually. There's no cell phone service in the high school, so definitely find someone who knows the Wi-Fi password. Otherwise, you're gonna have to pay attention the whole meeting. But it's fun to watch democracy in action. And it's sure to be an exciting one because some of the stuff that's coming up, and as you can sort of see here, the diverse thoughts and feelings and opinions on all that stuff. So
I think Caroline said she'd bring coffee for everyone that attends. I'm pretty sure.
Whole town. I'm gonna bring coffee for the whole town. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. I hope this was helpful. Feel free, if you found us on Facebook, put any feedback or comments how we can do this better or different next year. I can't imagine that you would have any improvements, but if you do, let us know. We want to keep people engaged and we want you to feel informed. So let us know how we can do that.
Yeah, and this meeting was recorded, so we'll find our way to get that online and share it with your friends, your neighbors, share this information and reach out if you have any questions.
Awesome. John and Caroline, I hope you're inspired.
True inspiration.
No, honestly, but it's great to learn about these things, and we want to live here for a long time, and we have 2 kids who will grow up here, so it's important to us.
Awesome.
All right, we have future candidates to run for office next year. All right, so we know who we're recruiting.
Can't wait to see you guys at the elections. All right, bye everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right.